In Oxygen 6, classes and variables are core to our developer-focused workflow, not just an afterthought. Let's jump into Oxygen and I'll show you how it works. Let's go ahead and add a new element. So I'll go over to my add panel and drag in some text right below this person's name here. And with this element selected, you can see all of our properties on the right-hand side, but you'll note that there are no styling options. And that's because there's no class on this element yet. You can't style anything in Oxygen without first giving it a class. So when we want to style it, we go up here to our classes area and we can create the default auto-generated class if we don't want to be super careful with how we're naming our classes. For one-off elements where you don't want to repeat the styles across multiple elements, this is a perfect option. So I'm going to drop that in. Once that's done, I now have a full suite of styling options for this element, including layout, spacing, size, position, etc. But let's say that I don't want this to be a one-off element. I'm going to go ahead and remove this class. And then let's take a look at this element. I like the styles that it's using, so I want to reuse these classes. All I have to do is right-click, hit Copy Selectors, select my text element, right-click, and hit Paste Selectors, and now it has the same exact style. And if I want to change all the elements using these classes, I just select a class, go over to the property I want to change. Let's say I want to change something about the typography. Let's go over here and I can see that the color property is actually set via a different class. If I hover over it, I'll see it's the text-8 class. So we can go over and select that class here. And now we can actually change this color. Right now it's using a variable, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But if I want to get rid of that variable and just set the color using a color picker, I can do that. And you can see both of these text elements have changed. Let's go ahead and change that back. So we'll click text, we'll go over to typography, and we will pick from our variables here. I believe it was using this one before. And let's get rid of this text element because we don't need it. That was just for demonstration purposes. Now you can see working with classes in Oxygen is so easy and it's right at the forefront. Nothing is tucked behind special menus or hidden in the settings. Classes are key to how you work with elements and style them in Oxygen. But once you have a bunch of classes, you need to be able to manage them. We can do that under the Selectors panel here. You can see we have the ability to group our classes, name the groups. So we have the default group right here, which is where everything goes by default. We can also add new selectors. This is the Selectors panel, not the Classes panel. So we can add complex selectors like this example here that targets a child element with a specific ID using the after pseudo element. We can also add a new group or collection here, and we can even manage the existing selectors and rename them and things like that. So let's find our text 8. So here's the one we were working with a moment ago. If we click the drop down, we're going to see all of our different options. We can rename it, duplicate it, delete it, lock it, which means you won't actually be able to change the styles on this class without unlocking it. And we can style the different states of this class, and we can create nested selectors. Most of this is pretty self-explanatory, but I'll show you what happens if we rename or duplicate it. So for instance, we want to rename this. We'll call it slate text because that's the color that it applies to the text. Once we hit enter, that's renamed. Not only here, but you can see that this text that was using text-8 before still has that styling. That's because if we click into that element, that renaming operation went through every element that uses that class and renamed it there too. So you can use the default generated class names from Oxygen to style things pretty quickly, and then later you can rename those classes to make sure that you understand exactly what they're doing. Now let's say we want a different color for some of our text and we want to start based off of this class. We can click the drop down arrow and click duplicate. Now what that does is it removes the class that we duplicated, creates a copy, adds it to this element, and then selects it for renaming. So we'll call it white-text. Now we can go in and safely alter the styles of this class without changing the slate class. And let's go ahead and change the color here to white. But if we want to swap over to the slate class, that's still available for us. So let's add that one and remove the white text class. One more thing I want to show you is that our support for classes extends not only throughout the user interface, but also even into writing code. So let's add a CSS code block here, and let's expand the code editor out And let's say I want to style elements with a specific class using some CSS code. But I'm not going to have all my classes committed to memory. So in Oxygen, when you're working with CSS, if you start typing class names, you're going to have an autocomplete function. I know that the Slate class, for instance, starts with an S, so I'll put period and type S. And now I see slate-text. So I can go ahead and hit enter to autocomplete that, and then I can apply my styling. And it doesn't end there. In fact, the autocomplete extends to variables as well. So if I want to change the color to something that is saved as a variable in Oxygen, I can type var, open the parentheses, and then type dash dash to get all of my variable options that have been saved here in Oxygen. So I know that slate is one. So if I start typing slate, I'm going to see all my different shades of slate. We can change this to something like slate 400 if we want. So it's clear from all of these nice little enhancements and the user interface that is dedicated to managing and altering classes that classes are a primary focus of Oxygen, and that's because that's how the modern web is styled. Next, I want to show you how Oxygen handles variables. We've already seen a little bit of the affordances that Oxygen has when it comes to variables, but we have our own dedicated variables area as well. If we go up here to this $, we're going to see all of our variables, and much like classes, we can group them and rename the groups to keep them nicely organized. You can see here we've got color groups that are nothing but color variables, which is super handy. And then up here we've got variables for font sizes as well as some basic foundational colors. If we add a variable, you can see that we can add a color variable, a number variable, a unit variable where you want the unit to actually be part of the variable, a font family variable, and an image URL variable. These are all the different types you can create. And when you combine these with classes, you get a couple of layers of scalability. First of all, your classes can contain all of your styles, but then your styling properties can be based on variables, which gives you an incredible amount of flexibility when it comes to making changes later. For instance, you can have a text class that sets the font size, but the font size can be based on a variable, and that variable can be used across multiple classes, which means instead of having to change the font size from class to class to class, you can just hop in and change the variable. It's kind of like the core source of truth, the foundational building block that everything else is kind of built on top of. And we can see that in action with our earlier example of this text element. Let's get rid of this CSS code and let's select this text. If we go over to the slate text class, this is applying some typography options, but you can see the color is a variable. So we could have multiple slate text classes all using this color, and if we changed it in the variables area, it would apply across all of those classes. Let's duplicate this really quick and I'll show you what I mean. We'll add a slate text 2 class by duplicating that class, and we'll name it slate text -2. And let's say we want this one to have the same color, but we want it to be a little bit bigger. So we'll set the font size to 28. So now we have two classes. One applies a font size and one doesn't, but they both need to apply the same color. Normally, if we wanted to change that color, we'd have to change it on both of those classes. But since we're using Oxygen, we can go in. Let's make sure we see which variable it's using. It's slate-700. So if we go into our variables area, we can scroll down to the slate group, and this 700 one is the one we want to change. Now, if we tweak it, you can see that that change is applied to both of those elements. So by using variables and classes together, you can create incredibly robust and resilient design systems that will never lock you into something that's a headache to change later.